The cobalt blue tiles shimmered like liquid midnight, a perfect, deep counterpoint to the desert gold travertine deck Ethan Cole had spent 4 months installing. His pool wasn't just a pool. It was the final, defiant centerpiece of his new life in Crestwood Estates, a sprawling, over-manicured labyrinth of expensive conformity. Ethan, a software architect who valued function over form, had made one crucial aesthetic mistake. He'd chosen a blue that, to the HOA president, Beverly Thorne, was non-compliant. Beverly didn't knock. She used a specialized magnetic key card to glide past the community gates and simply appeared on Ethan's deck, always at the most inconvenient times, armed with a clipboard and an expression of tightly controlled disapproval. "Mr. Cole," Beverly stated, her voice sharp enough to cut the water's surface tension, "this is the final written notice." Ethan, balancing on the edge of the diving board, dried his hands on a towel. "Beverly, please." "It's cobalt blue. It's a shade darker than the approved estate blue. Nobody else cares." "I had 3 contractors tell me it's gorgeous." Beverly adjusted the thin gold chain supporting her HOA badge, her perfectly coiffed silver hair unmoving in the dry, hot breeze. "The architectural guidelines, Article 6, Section C, Paragraph 4, explicitly state that all visible pool surfaces must fall within the luminance and saturation index, LSI range, of 65 to 72. Your contractors are artists. Mr. Cole, I am an enforcer of community standards." She tapped her clipboard. "Your tiling reads at a 58. It absorbs too much light. It's an eyesore, and, frankly, it clashes with the traditional aesthetic of this subdivision. You have 72 hours to drain, jackhammer, and replace the tiling, or face an escalating daily fine." Escalating fine. "Beverly, this is a $20,000 renovation." Ethan stepped down, his frustration bubbling up faster than the pool's skimmers. "I just moved here. I paid my dues. This is harassment. My house is perfect. My lawn is immaculate. You are literally making trouble over a shade of blue." "We uphold property values, Mr. Cole," she countered, her eyes cold and unwavering. "Compliance is non-negotiable. I suggest you begin the work immediately. I have already flagged your account for immediate structural review should the deadline pass." She spun on her heel and walked away, her immaculate white sandals clicking against the travertine. Ethan was supposed to attend a critical 3-day conference in San Diego starting the next morning. It was impossible to start a pool retiling job. He fired off an email to the entire HOA board detailing Beverly's vendetta and requesting an emergency review, but the automated reply confirmed the board wouldn't convene for another 2 weeks. He felt trapped. He decided to call his lawyer from the road and deal with the fines later. The pool was fine. It would wait. He was wrong. Beverly Thorne watched Ethan's black SUV pull out of the drive at 6 a.m., the trunk laden with luggage. Her lips curved into a small, tight smile. The board was slow, the rules were vague, and the power she wielded as the head of the Architectural Review Committee was absolute, if she chose to define it that way. The pool was a structural blight. It was non-compliant. Non-compliance was a hazard to the community's aesthetic integrity, and she had a duty to perform emergency remediation. By 9 a.m., a battered, rusty pickup truck with Hector's all-purpose maintenance, painted crudely on the side, backed into Ethan's driveway, bypassing the construction permit restrictions with a forged note bearing Beverly's signature and the official-looking, yet entirely fictitious, seal of HOA Emergency Remediation Services. Hector, a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, climbed out, wiping sweat from his brow. Beverly met him at the curb, holding a 5-gallon plastic bucket filled with a dry gray powder. "Hector, listen carefully. This is specialized, quick-setting structural compound. The owner here is out of town and has left a dangerous chemical imbalance in the water. We need to neutralize the deep end immediately to prevent a filtration system failure. I need you to dump all of this into the deep end, then immediately turn off the pool's circulation pump and close the main drainage valve. Do not stop until the bucket is empty. Get the water to a state of stasis. Understood?" Hector frowned, looking at the pool's crystal clarity. "Senora, that looks like quick-dry cement. Why would you put cement in the pool? That'll ruin the pump, the filters, everything." Beverly reached into her purse and pulled out 3 crisp $100 bills, adding them to the agreed-upon amount. This is a proprietary HOA remediation mix. It's expensive, specialized work. My instructions are clear, Hector. I am supervising. Just do it. Hector looked from the money to the bucket, then back to the money. He sighed, picked up the bucket, and walked toward the pool. The deep end was 8 feet of cobalt brilliance. Hector walked to the edge and, with a grim shrug, upended the 5-gallon bucket. The powder hit the water in a sickening gray plume. The mix, designed for underwater, fast-setting repairs, reacted instantly to the hyperchlorinated water. Instead of sinking to the bottom as a manageable pile, a violent exothermic reaction began. The water began to steam slightly, a chemical odor wafting up as the cement swelled, expanded, and began to solidify with alarming speed, not just settling but actively displacing the water. Hector, horrified by the immediate irreversible outcome, quickly shut off the main pump and twisted the drainage valve shut, as instructed, and fled, taking his payment and his battered truck with him. Beverly stood watching for 10 minutes, satisfied. The entire deep end, the source of Ethan's aesthetic defiance, was now a solid battleship gray monument to compliance. Let him try to sue me now, she thought. The structural hazard has been mitigated. She didn't stay long enough to hear the sickening subterranean groaning. Ethan's flight landed after midnight. His work trip had been a bust, overshadowed by the absurdity of Beverly's last threat. He drove home, exhausted, expecting to see a stupid fine stapled to his door. He did not see a fine. He saw a disaster. His floodlights, set to motion detect, flicked on, illuminating the pool deck. Ethan slammed on the brakes of the SUV. The deep end of his pool was no longer water. It was a massive, lumpy, uneven slab of gray concrete, half submerged in the remaining water, which was now a muddy, opaque sludge. The pressure of the rapid expansion hadn't just ruined the water. It had cracked the beautiful, expensive cobalt tiles, splintering them outward. Worst of all, the rapid heat had caused the surrounding deck concrete to spiderweb with cracks running toward the house. No, Ethan whispered, stepping out of the car. No, he ran to the edge. It looked like a terrible modernist mausoleum. In his fury, he yanked on the pool pump cover. The entire housing was warped and smelled strongly of burned plastic and chemicals. He paused, then noticed the sound. A rhythmic, wet gurgle splutter coming from his neighbor's yard. Mrs. Henderson's perfect front lawn. Ethan climbed the fence, landing softly on the meticulously striped Bermuda grass. Mrs. Henderson's yard was dark, but the moonlight illuminated a horrifying spectacle. Near the curb, right where the main storm drain inlet was, the ground had visibly sunk several inches, forming a shallow, muddy crater. And from the small, circular drainage grate, a dark, viscous slurry was erupting like a geological phenomenon, pooling over the street and the sidewalk. The slurry was gray, the same gray as the monument in his backyard. He fumbled for his phone. 3 missed calls from Mrs. Henderson. He opened her text. Mr. Cole, sinkhole in my pansies. My foundation is shaking. Call me, the street is wet. Ethan looked back at his house. The cement had cracked his pool. The cracked pool had ruptured his main underground drain and filtration lines. The sheer chemical volume and pressure of the setting cement had blown out the connection where his lines fed into the shared community drainage system, which in turn fed into the common reservoir and storm runoff network. Beverly hadn't just put cement in his pool. She had weaponized the shared infrastructure. A low, guttural moan came from the street. Ethan stepped back, phone forgotten in his hand. The cement-gray eruption near the storm drain suddenly intensified. The cast-iron cap on the main street's drainage access point. A heavy, 4-foot-wide circular lid was lifted a foot into the air by immense, subterranean pressure before falling back down with a deafening, sickening clang. Ethan stood frozen, watching the contaminated water surge over the now sunken curb. He looked at his house, then down the perfectly straight, perfectly lined street. The streetlights illuminated 3 different spots where water, now clearly a mix of earth and setting cement, was weeping from hairline cracks in the asphalt. His pool was ruined. But the consequences had just gone neighborhood-wide. The battle for a shade of blue had just become a multi-million-dollar public works disaster. The deafening clang of the manhole cover hitting the asphalt shattered the early morning silence. Two porch lights flickered on down the street, and a dog started barking with hysterical urgency. Ethan stood in the spreading gray puddle, the sickly sweet smell of chemical chlorine mixing with wet earth. A patrol car, siren muted, lights flashing discreetly, rolled slowly up the curb. Officer Ramirez stepped out, notepad in hand, surveying the scene. The ruptured street, the muddy slurry, and Ethan standing ankle-deep in the mess, still dressed in his travel clothes. "Mr. Cole, I'm here responding to a distress call about a possible sinkhole and foundation damage," Ramirez stated calmly, then pointed at the pooling sludge. "What exactly is this? And why is it pouring out of the storm drain?" Before Ethan could answer, Beverly Thorne emerged from her immaculate home 2 doors down, already perfectly dressed in white tennis attire, her face a mask of concerned public service. She approached, gliding past the caution tape Ramirez had just unfurled. "Officer, thank you for your prompt response," Beverly interjected smoothly, planting herself firmly between Ethan and the officer. "I am Beverly Thorne, the HOA president. This is an unfortunate incident resulting from a gross violation of community guidelines by Mr. Cole." Ethan whirled on her, his exhaustion replaced by white-hot rage. "Beverly, you psychotic vandal. You did this! You illegally trespassed on my property and poured 5 gallons of fast-setting cement into my pool. You tried to fix a shade of blue and you blew up the neighborhood." Beverly didn't flinch. She turned to Officer Ramirez with an expression of weary disappointment. "You see the emotional state I'm dealing with, officer. Let me explain the timeline. Mr. Cole installed non-compliant, chemically unstable tiling. His failure to address this aesthetic hazard led to a catastrophic internal filtration failure. The ensuing rupture of his personal pool lines caused a sudden spike in pressure, which regrettably stressed our community's aging common lines." She tapped her HOA badge. "I was in the process of attempting emergency chemical stabilization, a mandated HOA procedure, when the structural failure occurred. This is his liability, officer. A clear case of non-compliance leading to negligence." "That is a lie!" Ethan lunged forward, but Ramirez put a restraining hand on his chest. "Sir, calm down," Ramirez warned. "Ms. Thorne, you say you put a stabilization mix into his pool?" "Yes, a proprietary compound to prevent chlorine overflow," Beverly said, nodding sincerely. "I have the emergency requisition form right here." She produced a laminated card, not a permit, but a generic HOA emergency contact card, and flashed it briefly before returning it to her tennis skirt pocket. A high-pitched, feminine shriek pierced the air. Mrs. Henderson, a diminutive woman of 70, ran out onto her front porch, pointing a trembling finger at the cracked foundation of her home. "My sunroom, my glass! It's all separated from the main house, and the pipes are whistling. I told you, Beverly, my pansies are drowning in gray mud." "See, Mr. Cole?" Beverly said, her voice dropping to a low conspiratorial murmur for Ramirez's benefit. "Emotional distress. This simply validates my assessment that we must contain the damage quickly." Ethan pulled out his phone, flipping the camera to record. "Beverly, repeat for the officer what you put into my pool. Was it quick-dry cement? Did you authorize that purchase from the Hector's all-purpose maintenance guy with the rusty truck?" Beverly's eyes narrowed, catching the camera light. She stepped back, a dangerous coldness creeping into her voice. "I don't respond to amateur cross-examination, Mr. Cole. I followed protocol. The matter is currently under review by our legal counsel. You are now being fined not only for the aesthetic non-compliance, but for structural terrorism against the community's shared infrastructure. We will be suing for full damages, including Mrs. Henderson's foundation repair, and the immediate replacement of the community drainage line, which your negligence damaged." The police officer looked completely lost. "Ma'am, sir, this is a civil matter that has turned into an environmental issue. I cannot arrest anyone based on a dispute over pool blue or structural terrorism. I am calling the city's Public Works Department." The mention of public works seemed to momentarily rattle Beverly. She knew the HOA bylaws gave her power over community disputes, but city involvement meant real regulations, real permitting, and external investigation. Ethan saw his chance. "Officer, Let me show you the evidence that she's lying about filtration failure. I had my lawyer flag the board yesterday about her personal vendetta. She acted while I was out of town to avoid due process. He pointed to his pool. That is 8 feet of solid, rapidly expanding concrete, not a stabilization mix. It ruptured the intake, not the outflow. I bet there's a fraudulent receipt and a forged permit in her files. Beverly straightened her spine. My files are private, Mr. Cole, and I resent the accusation of fraud. She looked at the police officer. Officer, I need to go to the clubhouse to secure the community's water valves. The pressure is dropping. This man is agitated, and I believe he presents a further risk to property. As Beverly walked briskly toward the community center, Officer Ramirez turned to Ethan. Listen, you need a lawyer, right now. You also need to file a formal report with the city about possible toxic runoff. I can see the cement is running down the gutter. I'm calling him now, Ethan said, dialing his corporate lawyer, praying he knew environmental law. Just then, the scene worsened. 3 more residents, the Millers and the Rodriguezes, walked out of their houses, drawn by the flashing lights and the smell. Mr. Rodriguez, a retired engineer and former HOA board member who Beverly had successfully deposed, pointed at the gray pooling on his lawn. That's not water, folks. That's grout. Look how thick it is. He walked up to Ethan. Beverly is an authoritarian, Ethan. If she did this, she used the common line as a pressure relief valve. She might have plugged the main. She told Hector to turn off the pump and close the drainage valve, Ethan muttered, the image of the panicked handyman flashing in his memory. She intentionally trapped the setting cement inside my system, and it had nowhere to go but out through the path of least resistance, Mr. Rodriguez concluded grimly. The weakest point is always the junction with the communal line. If that's clogged, the pressure from the irrigation system, which runs 24/7 this time of year, is going to back up and start forcing cement and water into every hairline fracture in the street and the ground. It could be miles of pipe. Ethan looked down the street toward the main recreational center, the real jewel of the community, the center of all HOA power, major turning point, karma shock. Suddenly, an alarm blared, a deep, monotonous, mechanical wail. It wasn't a car alarm. It was the emergency system for the Crestwood Estates clubhouse. All heads snapped toward the center of the neighborhood. A second later, a massive, cylindrical piece of earth, roughly 30 feet across, in the middle of the prized. Immaculate croquet lawn next to the clubhouse, simply dropped a full 3 feet, forming a perfect, terrifying disk of newly sunken turf. The ornamental fountain, which had been the symbol of Beverly's reign, instantly tilted, its concrete base snapping with an audible crack. The pressure and obstruction were so great that the backed-up sewage irrigation system had found a new high-visibility escape route. The foundation of the very place where Beverly exercised her authority had just been compromised. Ethan exchanged a look of shocked realization with Mr. Rodriguez. The disaster was now centered squarely on Beverly's turf. This was no longer just Ethan's non-compliant pool. This was a communal physical collapse, and Beverly was standing right there inside the building that was now sinking. The emergency alarm at the Crestwood Estates clubhouse shrieked, a piercing testament to a failing infrastructure. The collective gaze of the gathered residents, Mrs. Henderson, the Millers, the Rodriguezes, and Officer Ramirez, was fixed on the great, sunken circle in the croquet lawn. Ethan was the first to move, sprinting toward the building. He wasn't motivated by altruism, but by a chilling realization. If the structural failure was happening there, the main drainage hub for the entire central loop of the community was choked solid. He found Beverly just inside the clubhouse lobby, standing over a massive bronze relief map of Crestwood Estates. She was no longer composed. Her white tennis outfit seemed suddenly inappropriate for the scene of a disaster. Her hands were shaking as she fumbled with a large antique brass key. "The main service panel," she muttered, her voice thin. "I have to shut off the primary irrigation feed or the pressure will blow out the main water tank." "You already blew out the main line, Beverly," Ethan roared, slamming his palms on the reception desk. "You put expanding cement into the outflow. It didn't just ruin my pool. It hardened into a goddamn subterranean dam. Everything is backed up. The ground is saturated, and the clubhouse foundation is compromised. Beverly finally turned, her eyes wide with frantic, cornered desperation. This is exactly what the non-compliant blue caused. Chemical incompatibility! Your shoddy tiles. She pointed a trembling finger at him. You will pay for this! The board will vote this afternoon to assess the entire cost of the cleanup against your single account. Before Ethan could respond, the lobby door burst open. In swept Mr. Rodriguez, followed by a middle-aged woman in a neon yellow vest labeled City Public Works, Environmental Hazard Response, and Officer Ramirez, who looked relieved to hand off the crisis. Ms. Thorne, Mr. Cole, the Public Works official, whose name tag read M. Chen, spoke with an air of professional yet exhausted authority. We have an immediate situation. We've spotted gray, caustic runoff reaching the municipal reservoir inlet. The entire 400 series drainage line is compromised. We are mandated to shut down water and irrigation to Crestwood Estates immediately until the toxic source is identified and neutralized. Beverly's facade finally cracked. Shut down water? You can't! The property values. The landscaping will die. Property values are secondary to potable water safety, ma'am, Chen countered, pulling out a specialized tablet. The preliminary chemical analysis shows high concentrations of Portland cement components mixed with industrial-grade chlorine and trace amounts of copper. This didn't come from a tile. This came from an illegal, unauthorized dump. We have already logged the ruptured junction at Mr. Cole's residence as the source. Beverly's eyes darted toward Ethan, her gaze filled with pure hatred. I was attempting remediation. It was a community stabilization mix. We will need the vendor invoice and the MSDS sheet for that compound immediately, Ms. Thorne, Chen said, her eyes never leaving her tablet. If that compound is indeed cement, the structural damage is not localized. It means a section of our main line, possibly hundreds of feet long, is essentially a rapidly setting concrete tube. We are looking at a full-scale excavation of the entire central loop, potentially involving 4 streets. Ethan leaned in, his voice low and accusatory. The vendor was Hector's all-purpose maintenance. Check your records. Ms. Thorne, see how many permits he has for emergency chemical stabilization. Mr. Rodriguez, who had listened intently, pulled Ethan aside. He's a ghost, Ethan. Hector works cash only. But when he was doing odd jobs here years ago, I remember he used to stop at the old rundown hardware store on Route 51. They sell 5-gallon buckets of fast-set underwater patch, the kind she used. It leaves a distinct brand mark on the plastic. We need to find that bucket and the work order before she destroys the evidence. She's going to deny everything, Ethan said, watching Beverly's strained, almost manic conversation with Chen. She can deny all she wants, Rodriguez replied. But she forged the emergency requisition and she paid in cash. Her biggest mistake was hiring someone with a truck, an unregistered, conspicuous vehicle. I have a dash cam that records all traffic coming through the main gate. I can pull the license plate of that rusty pickup. The sound of massive machinery outside signaled the arrival of the city's heavy-duty cleanup crew. The financial clock was now ticking in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Ethan and Rodriguez slipped out. Ethan felt a new sense of purpose. He was no longer just a victim fighting a fine. He was a detective trying to prevent an intentional, malicious catastrophe from being blamed on him. Rodriguez pulled the dash cam footage on his laptop in his dimly lit garage. Within 5 minutes, they had the license plate 4J6T98. It was a pre-2000s Ford Ranger, registered to a man named Hector Chavez in a neighboring town. They located Hector's home address, a small, prefabricated trailer behind a mechanic shop. She paid him cash to do something illegal, Ethan surmised. He knows she's the one who gave the order. He's an undocumented laborer, Rodriguez warned, shutting the laptop. He will disappear the second he hears police or HOA. We need to approach him not as accusers, but as people who want to mitigate his liability before Beverly's lawyers tie this around his neck. They drove to the address, finding Hector sitting on a plastic lawn chair, nervously cleaning his work boots. He immediately recognized Ethan's upscale SUV. Ethan stepped out, holding his hands up placatingly. Hector, wait. We're not the police. We're not the HOA. My name is Ethan Cole. That was my pool you dumped the mix into this morning. Hector jumped up, dropping a boot. La Senora told me it was a chemical stabilizer. She gave me $300 extra for the rush job. She said the owner was a problem and the community rules were more important. I know, Hector, Ethan said, his voice calm. She lied. She gave you quick-set cement, and now it's solidified inside the drainage pipe for the entire neighborhood. That's a serious environmental issue. When the city finds out, they won't come after her first. They'll come after the man who dumped the material. You. Hector's face went ashen. No, por favor. I have a family. We can help you, Rodriguez chimed in. But we need the evidence. We need you to tell the city exactly what Beverly Thorne told you to do and show us the empty cement bucket. Where did you leave it? The bucket? Hector pointed vaguely. I left it near the fence by the clubhouse back gate, where I turned off the valve like she told me. Ethan's phone buzzed. It was his corporate lawyer, Marcus, with a short, typed message. Just spoke with the Crestwood Estates legal counsel. HOA is trying to vote an emergency $450K assessment onto your property tomorrow morning. They're claiming gross willful negligence. We need hard evidence of trespass and instruction now. We need to get back to the clubhouse immediately, Ethan said, looking from Hector to Rodriguez. Beverly will be clearing that area right now. Back at Crestwood Estates, the public works crew had begun the initial loud demolition near the sunken croquet lawn. A backhoe was tearing up the ornamental fountain base, revealing deep, saturated earth. Ethan and Rodriguez found the back gate. The area was restricted, but the public works crew was focused on the front. Hidden beneath a pile of old fence posts, they spotted a 5-gallon plastic pail. Rodriguez grabbed it. The pail was heavy, containing residual cement dust. But most importantly, it had a faded, torn label, a commercial brand, explicitly labeled Hydropatch, Rapid Structural Underwater Cement. And stuck to the bottom of the pail, held by a small piece of clear packing tape, was a small, smudged receipt. Ethan snatched the receipt, his heart hammering. It was an invoice from the Route 51 hardware store. The buyer's name was smudged, but the form of payment was clearly marked. HOA account credit card. They had the cement. They had the confession, and they had the financial paper trail linking the intentional purchase directly to the Crestwood Estates HOA funds, not Ethan's supposed negligence. They ran back to the lobby just as Beverly was ending her heated call, her hand covering the speaker. "You won't get away with this, Mr. Cole," she hissed, triumphant. "The board will convene at 8 sharp. Your fine is incoming." Ethan didn't speak. He simply held up the plastic bucket and the receipt. Beverly stared at the empty bucket, her face draining of color. She knew that bucket had been contaminated with cement powder. She knew she had paid for it with the HOA's card. Just then, Marcus, Ethan's lawyer, strode into the lobby, phone to his ear, his sharp, expensive suit a stark contrast to the muddy chaos. He terminated his call and looked directly at Beverly. "Ms. Thorne, your legal counsel has just been informed that we possess sufficient evidence, including testimony and forensic materials, to confirm that the Crestwood Estates HOA, under your specific and unauthorized direction, procured and deployed structural cement into my client's private pool line," Marcus stated, his voice cutting through the noise. "The city has designated this a felony environmental hazard. Furthermore, the use of HOA funds to commit a deliberate act of property damage means that the HOA's liability insurance has been voided for gross intentional misconduct." Marcus paused, letting the full weight of the statement hang in the air. "The $450,000 assessment?" Marcus smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "That's now the HOA's liability, Ms. Thorne. And given the extent of the damage to the munishi..." The emergency HOA meeting room, usually a pristine chamber of passive aggression and polite nodding, was choked with 40 furious, terrified homeowners. It was 8 a.m., but the atmosphere felt like midnight. The air hung thick with the smell of wet cement dust wafting in from the massive backhoe, now tearing apart the croquet lawn outside the clubhouse windows. Marcus, Ethan's lawyer, stood next to Ethan by the projector screen, looking utterly composed. Beverly Thorne sat at the head of the long mahogany table, flanked by the two remaining, shell-shocked board members, Carol and David, who were staring at her with looks of dawning betrayal. To reiterate, since the majority of you seem to be experiencing shock, Marcus stated, projecting an aerial photo of the community's plumbing network. The intentional, unauthorized dumping of rapid-setting structural cement into the drainage lines, sanctioned by your HOA president, Ms. Thorne, has created a major, irreversible blockage, a $3 million plumbing pipe shaped like a solid concrete snake. Because this action voids the HOA's master liability policy, the city is legally obligated to levy the entire cost of the excavation, replacement, and environmental remediation back to the governing body. A man in the third row, Mr. Chen, not the public works official, stood up, his voice cracking. But what does that mean practically? I just refinanced my home. How much is the special assessment per house? Marcus didn't hesitate. The total current exposure, including legal, environmental, and infrastructure damage, is projected to exceed $3.5 million. Divided by the 120 properties in Crestwood Estates, that is a non-negotiable mandatory levy of approximately $29,000 per home. Payable within 30 days, the room erupted. It was a cacophony of desperate shouts, sobbing, and the sound of cell phones simultaneously dialing banks and lawyers. $29,000? I can't afford that, Mrs. Henderson cried, her hands clamped over her ears. My foundation is already cracked. I'm on a fixed income. Beverly, you guaranteed our insurance was ironclad, shouted David, one of the board members, pushing his chair back. You told us your oversight was foolproof. Beverly rose finally, her face rigid with what she clearly believed was strategic authority, not panic. Silence! All of you! This man is speculating. She slammed her hand on the table. I moved to mitigate a chemical hazard created by Mr. Cole's non-compliant pool. I acted for the community. Ethan stepped forward, holding the plastic cement bucket and the HOA credit card receipt aloft. You acted for your ego, Beverly. I have the receipt, paid for with your money, proving you bought illegal commercial-grade cement. I have a sworn affidavit from the maintenance worker, Hector, detailing how you instructed him to dump it and then intentionally shut off the valves to trap the expanding material in the system. That is not mitigation. That is deliberate criminal vandalism. Beverly stared at the evidence, her chest heaving. She knew the game was over, but her pride wouldn't allow her to surrender. She launched her last desperate attack, leaning across the table toward Ethan. You're going to regret this, Cole. You are destroying this community with your spite. I have 2 decades of history here. You've been here 6 months. I know every bylaw, every weak point. I will personally ensure your life here is a living hell. I will use every dollar of the HOA's legal reserves to bankrupt you and that lying maintenance worker. You think you won? Look outside! Your little blue pool cost everyone their savings. As if on cue, a shadow fell over the meeting room. Monsieur Chen, the public works official, stood in the doorway, her yellow vest stark against the chaos. Behind her, framed by the shattered window overlooking the croquet lawn, 2 police officers moved with deliberate heavy steps toward the clubhouse entrance. Ms. Thorne, I need to speak with you immediately, Chen said, her voice now devoid of professional pleasantness. The initial excavation has revealed an alarming secondary issue. Beverly ignored her, marching toward Ethan. This isn't over, Cole. I'm still the president, and you are still non-compliant. Actually, you're not, Marcus interrupted, calmly placing a legal document on the table. The remaining board members, Carol and David, have just signed a motion to immediately remove you from all executive and committee positions for cause, effective immediately. They've also signed a resolution to cooperate fully with the city's investigation into criminal environmental endangerment. Your access to all HOA resources, including the legal fund you just threatened to misuse, is terminated. Beverly looked back at Carol and David, who simply turned their heads away, their faces etched with guilt and fear. The silence was absolute. The noise outside, the grinding of the backhoe, seemed deafening. Chen stepped into the room holding her tablet. Ms. Thorne, the city has just received an emergency injunction. Due to the high risk of further ground collapse, which has already compromised the foundation of the community gym and the main irrigation control shed, the city is exercising its right to declare Crestwood Estates a temporary disaster zone, Chen continued, her words landing like blows. This means all non-essential personnel must vacate the area within 12 hours. Furthermore, your attempt to seal the line has had a devastating side effect. The pressurized water, trapped by the cement, has caused significant subterranean erosion in a new spot. We believe the main pressure failure point is now directly under the foundation of your residence, Ms. Thorne. Beverly simply stared, her jaw slack. The woman who had obsessed over the structural integrity of a whole neighborhood was now facing the failure of her own home's foundation. We have detected a significant flow rate fluctuation directly beneath. 4215 Crestwood Drive, Chen finished, referring to Beverly's address. We need immediate access to your basement and garage to install ground monitoring sensors before we excavate that section of the street. If you refuse, we will be forced to secure a warrant and enter by force. Before the shock could fully register, the ground beneath the clubhouse shifted violently. A deep, resonant thud echoed through the floorboards. Outside, the backhoe operator immediately killed the engine and scrambled out of the machine. Ethan watched as the two police officers, who were now standing near the entrance, advanced not toward Ethan or Marcus, but directly toward Beverly. "Ms. Thorne," one officer stated, holding out a laminated card. "You are currently under investigation by the city and the State Department of Environmental Quality. We have a court-ordered warrant here to secure the primary residence at 4215 Crestwood Drive and require you to accompany us to the station to give a statement regarding the illegal use of hazardous materials." Beverly's control finally snapped. She lunged for the keys on the table, desperate to save her property, but the officer was faster, gently but firmly restraining her arm. "This is my home," she screamed, her voice high and ragged, a pathetic sound in the now silent room. "You can't do this to me. I was protecting the aesthetic. It was the blue pool." It was always the non-compliant blue. As the officers escorted a physically resisting, weeping Beverly out of the clubhouse and into the full view of her shocked, financially ruined neighbors, Ethan looked out the window. The excavation was massive. Half the croquet lawn was gone. And across the street, near Beverly's pristine, non-compliant home, the street asphalt was visibly beginning to buckle, weeping gray mud. The mandatory 12-hour evacuation period had expired. Crestwood Estates felt like a post-apocalyptic movie set, a monument to petty tyranny. Most residents had fled to hotels or relatives, leaving behind silent, manicured lawns now dotted with the orange cones and flashing yellow lights of a full-scale city response. The air no longer smelled of wet cement and chlorine, but of excavated dirt and ozone. Ethan stood on his front porch nursing a lukewarm coffee. Marcus, his lawyer, had secured him an essential personnel waiver, arguing that Ethan's property was the ground zero data source and therefore required his presence for monitoring. The truth was, Ethan felt an obligation to witness the final, awful reckoning. The focus of the entire operation was now 4215 Crestwood Drive, Beverly's house. A towering hydraulic excavator sat poised above a freshly dug trench that ran directly across her driveway and into her famous rose garden. The city crew, led by M. Chen, was preparing the final, delicate cut, the removal of the blockage located precisely beneath Beverly's foundation. "We've found the anomaly," Chen radioed to her team, her voice tight with professional tension. "The water pressure trapped behind the solid mass has undermined the substrate along the whole west perimeter. If that cement cylinder shifts even an inch when we cut the main, the ground will go." Ethan watched, captivated. He saw Mr. Rodriguez, the retired engineer, standing near the safety perimeter, shaking his head. "It's physics, Ethan," Rodriguez murmured as Ethan approached. She created a sealed pressure cooker. The water had nowhere to go but up and around. It eroded the soil, creating subterranean voids. "Her perfect, pristine house is now resting on a sponge. And all because of the blue," Ethan replied, looking toward his own pool, which now stood as the only clean, stable body of water in the entire subdivision. The pool's interior was sealed from the municipal lines, making it an unintentional bunker in a sea of disaster. At 10:30 a.m., the excavator bit down. It wasn't a quick, clean tear. The bucket struck the concrete-filled pipe, and the entire ground surrounding Beverly's property groaned. A sound like tearing canvas ripped through the silence, followed by the sickening crunch of wood and sheetrock. The sunroom, Beverly's favorite spot, where she used to peer out and monitor the community's deficiencies, was the first to go. The delicate glass structure, built on a slab that had been separated by the underground erosion, didn't shatter. It simply slid. It separated cleanly from the main house and tilted into the newly exposed chasm in the lawn. A geyser of muddy, rusty water, the last pressurized remnants of the irrigation system, shot 15 feet into the air. The crew immediately ceased operations. The chasm now ran from the street curb, through the rose garden, and deep beneath the corner of Beverly's two-car garage. Chen ran toward the edge of the pit, tablet in hand. "Structural failure confirmed. The lateral line is compromised. We have visual on the cement plug. It's over 20 feet long." Within the pit, revealed for all to see, was the literal source of the neighborhood's ruin. A massive, gray cylinder of rock-hard, quick-setting cement, perfectly encased in the fractured remnants of the PVC irrigation pipe. It was the subterranean dam Ethan had suspected, and it was a grotesque monument to one woman's overreaching control. 2 hours later, after the city's structural engineers had assessed the damage, the final verdict came through. Beverly Thorne's house was declared structurally unsound and uninhabitable. The city issued a preliminary order for emergency demolition, citing immediate risk of uncontrolled collapse that could damage neighboring properties. Ethan was on a video call with Marcus from his now unoccupied living room. The good news, Ethan, is that all charges against you have been dismissed. The city has officially cited Beverly Thorne for felony environmental vandalism, misuse of public funds, and reckless endangerment, Marcus stated, looking exhausted but victorious. "Hector is safe. We secured him full immunity in exchange for his testimony and the physical evidence." "And the special assessment?" Ethan asked. The core issue that had financially decimated his neighbors. Marcus sighed. "The levy stands, $29,000 per home, payable to a city-appointed fund. The HOA is essentially dissolved. The board resigned, and they're facing civil lawsuits from the residents. Crestwood Estates is now in receivership under the city until the cleanup is complete. Beverly's equity in her condemned home will be liquidated to offset the damage, but it's a drop in the bucket." Ethan walked over to his window and looked at the ravaged street. "So I won. But the whole neighborhood lost everything they loved about this place. The neighborhood lost because they enabled a toxic system for years. Ethan, you just happened to be the one non-compliant tile that made the structure crack," Marcus said pointedly. "Now about your pool. The city's environmental report notes that your private line is the only segment not chemically tainted, but for safety, and because the city is taking over all subterranean rights, they require you to—" Marcus paused for dramatic effect. "They require you to permanently seal your pool, not with cement, but with filled dirt and a cap. It's a non-negotiable safety measure for all pools bordering the main excavation zone." The irony was crushing. The battle had been fought and won, but the prize, the non-compliant, beautiful blue pool that started the whole disaster, had to be surrendered. 3 days later, Ethan stood by the edge of his pool. The excavation crew had arrived. The sun glinted off the non-compliant sapphire blue tiles one last time. It was a perfect crystalline body of water, a non-compliant oasis soon to be buried. He heard a voice behind him. It was Mr. Rodriguez holding 2 lukewarm beers. "A shame, Ethan. I always thought that color was a statement," Rodriguez said, handing him a can. "It was," Ethan replied, taking a long drink. "But statements don't stand up against a $3.5 million disaster." They stood in silence as the first large dump truck began backing up, its bed filled with clean brown earth. "I heard Beverly's sister had to bail her out. She's facing a massive civil suit from the city, plus restitution to the HOA, Rodriguez commented. "She's banned from Crestwood Estates for life. Her life's work, the aesthetic perfection, is now a hole in the ground." Ethan nodded, watching the dirt cascade into the deep end, displacing the beautiful blue water. As the truck finished its load and drove off, leaving a huge mound of dirt in the center of the now drying basin, Ethan noticed something floating near the shallow end, a single, dark blue piece of tile that had detached during the initial cement surge. It was the exact shade of non-compliant sapphire that had started the war. He reached down and picked it up. He looked at the tile, a small, seemingly innocent piece of ceramic, and then back at the empty, abandoned clubhouse, the giant trenches, and the skeleton of Beverly's house across the street. He slipped the tile into his pocket. He was moving out next month. The special assessment had hit him too, and the quiet life he wanted was gone. He finished his drink, crushed the can, and looked at the massive, permanent scar running through the neighborhood. The only remaining evidence of the conflict was the single, perfectly engineered, stable mound of fill dirt where the non-compliant pool had been, a final, ironic monument to the disastrous lengths one person would go to enforce conformity. The non-compliant blue was buried, but it had taken the entire community with it.